Hey, g'day, it's Presser. Thanks for stopping by. Now, a little while ago I was sent all of this brand new beautiful metric tooling by a gentleman named Bart Harkema. Now, Bart lives in the Netherlands and he posted a picture on Instagram of a Lister cabinet that he had, and it was absolutely chock-a-block with brand new metric tooling. Now, I told a bit of a sob story and said that, you know, if I break a cutter in my workshop, it means that I can't do any more machining until I replace it. Now, he must have felt sorry for me and he sent me this beautiful package. And it was very unexpected, but very, very much appreciated. So I wanted to return the favour in some way. What I thought I'd do is take his sticker and turn that into a cast metal sign to go up in his workshop. Now, I understand he recently demolished his workshop and built a new one. So if I make this cast sign, it can go up in his workshop or outside. I'll do it in aluminium and it'll be fully powder coated in the colours that you see there. That way he can put it outside if he wants to. So we're going to begin the process by scanning this image, and then it goes into Autodesk Inventor and it's actually put onto a plane as a sketch, and then you go about actually tracing all of the outlines of the letters. Now, I did all of that and still didn't look very good when I was finished. It's surprising when you scan a sticker that size that it's quite fuzzy around the edges. So what I did was I went through and I eventually found the font that Bart must have used, or his graphic designer, and I was able to type the lettering directly onto the sketch plane and then extrude that. Now, after the extrusion, you go through and you put a draft angle on all of the lettering, and I'm using 8 degrees as the draft angle. That gets extruded to 6mm high, and then we're going to 3D print all of the lettering and the border on my Prusa 3D printer. So I'm using PETG filament, and we'll take those letters and the border and we're going to use those to form the pattern. Now, the pattern backplate is made of MDF. It's been laser etched in my CO2 laser, and that means that we can place the lettering down onto that etched image, get the spacing accurate and exactly the same as a sticker. Laser etching that outline on this MDF panel here makes it much easier to position the letters accurately. The only thing is that when I 3D printed these letters here, I included a brim, and it doesn't come off easily. You've got to basically cut it off with a knife and then trim it. So a lot of work involved in that, but it's better to do it now. And then when you glue this down, just needs a sealer coat and then a coat of like automotive lacquer to give it a nice shiny finish. I'm just going to put a coat of shellac on this MDF. This will help it to seal, and when the epoxy goes on there, it's not going to soak into the fibres of the MDF. Shellac's good because it dries quickly and it's fairly inert. You can use it as a sort of a sealer coat under all sorts of finishes. and it's unlikely to be attacked by other solvents and so on, at least not to the point where it starts to bubble up and wrinkle. I'll let that dry. I'll put some on the edges and the back as well. It's quite dry now on both sides, and I've mixed up some of this West System 105 epoxy resin, and I put a colour in it. The only colour I had left was that shocking pink. But I did that so you can see how thick it goes on and where it forms the fillet. So I'm just going to brush this on. So having that colour in it allows you to see where you got it on really thick, and I need to be careful I don't leave too much in the centre of these letters like the A, the R, say here and so on. So I'm just going to fish it out with one of these cotton wool buds and try and reduce the amount that's trapped in there, and then we'll just let that set, and then we're going to paint it. I think that's done now. What I will do though is tilt this and try and get some of that heavy coverage in the centre there to run out and sort of run toward these outside edges. Okay, we'll come back and we'll paint shortly. That epoxy set up overnight now, it's quite hard, and what I'll do is get in and sand this background area a bit. There's some raised grain, a few patches there. I've already sanded off the top surface here. We don't need to have a dead flat surface on the top because when we machine this later on we'll take the top off all letters anyway. But you see there's quite a thick fillet around the base of each letter now, and that's a good thing. So when you pull this from the sand mould, it won't have a razor sharp edge where each letter penetrated into the sand bed. So that means less chance of the metal eroding away those sharp edges when it fills the mould. I'll give it a coat of this stuff here. This is a spray putty. It's used in automotive bodywork. It's a thick, quick drying paint that's really easy to sand back and get a high quality finish on it. And then I'll give it a top coat of this stuff. This is one of those automotive acrylic lacquers. Doesn't matter what the colour is. This is like a white, snow white. And they dry really quickly as well, and they get a hard finish on them. I've just cut some strips off these sanding pads here because they're nice and soft, and you can cut the shape to get into wherever you want to go. So that'll take several coats over several hours. You want to get a good thick coating, sand it back, and then use something like steel wool or a Scotch-Brite pad just to give it a final finish, and then we'll do the top coat. I've let that spray putty cure overnight. I've painted the back also, and I've inspected this, and it's pretty good. There's a couple of little issues here. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a little lump sticking out of the side wall of that 3D printed part there. That can be an issue when you go to pull the pattern from the mould. That little projection there will pull sand grains with it. So I'm going to have to clean that off. There are a couple of other places. Once again, in the bottom of that E there's a few little lumpy bits. So I'm just going to get a sanding stick and clean those up. And then I don't think I need to do any other sanding on the surfaces, just the internal edges and corners. That pattern's well and truly dry now, painted both sides. It's going in this fairly long flask, and I'm just sweating all over it because the temperature is 32 degrees. It says it feels like 34, it actually feels like 40 here. It's about 50% humidity, so perfect day for doing foundry work. Anyway, we're going to do this, and I'm going to use K-Bond sand, and yeah, let's see how it goes. This will soak up all the sweat. One of the difficulties of working with these flat, thin patterns is that you've got to be able to extract the pattern from the mould, and you also have to be able to wrap the pattern, which means tapping it left, right, front to back, basically all the way around, and that loosens the pattern. And there are no features on the back here to grab hold of. Now, if I drill a hole in this, there's a chance I'll drill right through, and I've done that before. So I've made this piece of wood here, and I'm going to hot glue that on. That's what that circular mark is for. And then it's got a drilled hole in it, which is deep enough that I can grab hold of, but it also allows me to put a riser over that. So I use that copper pipe there, and then as the metal flows into the cavity, it'll come up this riser, and that will also help to feed liquid metal back into the mould as it cools, or into the casting as it cools. I don't want to use too much glue in case I have to get it off again. This mould doesn't work out, I'll need to remove this. It's supposed to come out of there. Alright, that offset pouring base is a bit of a mess, but I'll clean that out after I separate the coat from the drag. I can sort of tip it on its side and just sort of tap all that sand out of there. I'll that's easy to tidy up. Alrighty. Alright, lost a bit here, but that's no big deal. That'll be fine. The important part is getting this out. Now the runner and the gates will go across from this side here, but I'm not going to do that until I'm sure this has come out successfully. So we're going to wrap this now. So just drive that wood screw into that piece of wood on top there. Now we just start tapping this. Okay, what we're really doing here is we're tapping the pattern in order to create clearance around the features on the pattern. So by using this tool here and tapping on that steel rod, we're forcing the pattern to move in a sort of a like circular direction, I guess. And then after a while you can sort of feel it rattles. I can actually feel that and I can hear it. So it's sort of enlarged the space around the features on the pattern. And so when we pull this now, it means that the sand that's been compacted around all those features is sort of really not touching it, and hopefully it doesn't pull it up as we extract the pattern. So I'm going to use this pattern extracting tool that I made as a way of ensuring that I can pull the pattern up fairly evenly and vertically. And we just line that wood screw up over the pattern and we lock the arm in place. Whoops. That's bad. Okay, lock that there. Sort of already know it's loose now. I just hope it didn't do any damage when I lifted that. What happened there was the arm was tilted down and I locked the clamp and it lifted the arm and sort of made it move outwards and pull the pattern with it. Anyway, you can always do it again, I guess. Here we go. Alright, got away with it. That looks perfect. Wait till I just show you the pattern. Well, there it is, clean as a whistle, which is a blessing. If any of that red K-bond sand was lodged in any part of that pattern, you know that the mould was damaged, but it's come out perfect. So I'm going to cut the runner and the gates. I'll put a long runner down this side and 3 gates, and then we'll go ahead and close it up and pour some metal. Geez, Mark, you're getting good. Alright, that's looking good. I'm really pleased with that. What I've done here is I just got a brush and I just swept the edges of the gates just to round them off slightly so that when the metal starts to overflow and run into the cavity, it doesn't erode what would otherwise be a very sharp edge. Cleaned it all out with like a low pressure compressed air, and what I'll do here is I'm going to tilt the mould so this runner is the lowest point in the mould. Now you only have to tilt it about like 10 degrees, and what happens then is the metal fills up from this side and flows through to the back side, and then it'll come up through the riser. And I think that works well on these long, thin, flat patterns. It just means that the metal is just slowly filling and it's not just fanning out like a river and starting to cool in certain places. Right, I'll get this together and we'll pour it. Those wedges there are just to raise the edge of the cope and to make sure that the metal is going to flow steadily across the mould and fill it up from the runner side all the way to the other side. I think that went okay. I could see the mould was filling steadily. I was accepting the metal and I was able to keep that tapered sprue full, and I could see the metal coming up through the riser as well. So just wait and see, fingers crossed. Still running the blower there at sort of low speed to try and ventilate this furnace a bit. And some people had asked whether I was running this furnace too rich, and the thing is I start it rich but then I dial it right back until it's running lean. And you can see from the interior there, it's almost pure white. There's no soot, no unburnt fuel. Otherwise you know, with that really black coating of soot on the inside there. So yeah, I'm happy with it. Now, one thing I've learned from doing this, you never pack up until you've seen the inside of the mould. And let's hope I only have to do this once. All right. All right, I'm calling that a win. That looks perfect. Well, there you go. Now I'm totally happy with that. That's probably the best one of these I've ever done. And I was sort of expecting trouble between the top of the E and the T there because the space is so narrow, and also at the bottom of the A and the L. But that detail has come out super crisp. So in order to fettle the casting, the gates and the runner were cut off with an angle grinder using a thin disc. And then to cut off the riser, I put the whole casting in my big bandsaw. I was able to grip that vertically in the vise and then cut off the remains of the riser very close to the back of the casting. So to clean up the edge of the casting where the gates were, I used my big flat bastard file. Now don't laugh, that's what it's called. Made short work of that material, left a fairly roughish finish, but I went back later on and draw filed that with a hand smooth file. Now the next step was to screw the entire casting down to a large block of wood, and I used the 4 drilled holes in the corners, and they match up with the detail on Bart's sticker, and this allowed me to clamp the material in the vise fairly easily. I used a machinist jack at the outboard end just to support it. Then I ran a large face mill over the entire surface, just doing a superficial cut, and then a deeper cut to give me a flat, smooth, even finish over the entire surface. And this made the edges of the lettering much more crisp. Now, if you take a look at Bart's sticker, you'll see that there's a natural break between these two different colours. So we've got a dark charcoal on this side here, got a sort of a cyan colour on this side here, and then there's a white stripe in between. Now, I was able to map out where that line would be just using a Sharpie. This got set up back in the milling machine at an angle so that the line we're going to cut is parallel to the x-axis, and then using a 3mm ball nose end mill, I was able to run that cut down to 1.5mm deep. Now that means that I'll be able to powder coat into that half round groove. Now if that slot went all the way through to the back plane of the casting, it would be very deep and very narrow, meaning it's almost impossible to get powder coat in there. Sandblasting helps to remove any grit or oil from the surface of that casting and gives it a uniform finish. And I've got 2 new colours here. Now this one here is called Dunbar Teal. It's a pretty close match with the colour on Bart's sticker. It's probably a bit darker than that, but at this scale I think it's going to work well. And then this one here is called Cobalt Grey. It's a really good match. So what I'm going to try to do here is put the teal, the Dunbar Teal, just on that section where it has to be that colour. Now there will be some overspray, you can't help that, but then I'll bake that. Then I'll mask that area off, and then we'll do the charcoal colour. Now once again, just try and concentrate in the areas where we need it. Bake that, and then do the whole thing white. Now before it goes in the oven with the white powder on it, I have to try and remove the powder from the surface where the colours have to be, and then bake it. Now in theory it should be possible, never tried it before, but we're going to give it a go. I've had this plate in the oven already. I ran the temperature right up to 240 degrees C, and there was a little bit of oil present in some of the porosity. So that's been burnt off now, it's looking pretty good. So when I spray this powder, you may notice that it starts to fuse almost straight away and get that glossy look, but that's okay. So you can see that glossing over almost straight away. That's because the material is already hot and there's enough residual heat in the part to fuse the powder. But this will go in the oven now. So I put the aluminium plate underneath that in the oven with the cast plate, and we'll leave that for another 10 minutes. To mask off that area where we got the Dunbar teal, I'm using this heat resistant Kapton tape. It's heat resistant alright, just doesn't stick very well, that's all. But it's only got to stay in there long enough until we get the powder on and it's starting to fuse. So as long as you don't sort of have any sort of weight hanging off it, I think it's okay. Sort of looks a bit untidy, but we just got to cover it up where the teal is going to be. Now you can hear the soft crested cockatoos, they're absolutely going off today. Don't know what's upset them. Okay, that should do it. So we'll get the charcoal colour on there now and bake that. Well, found out what was upsetting the cockatoos. There was a ringtail possum up in a tree and about 4 big white cockatoos harassing it for some reason. I don't know why. I suspect what happened was the birds just see the long tail from the possum and they think it's a snake. But either way, yeah, certainly made a racket. Okay, I'm just going to inspect that really closely, just make sure I haven't sort of left any light patches or any of that teal colour showing through, and then we'll bake that. Alright, so far so good, but now the hard part, got to get the white on and get it off again where we don't want it. I'll let this cool down. Let that cool down in the oven overnight, so I'm just going to remove the Kapton and just see what we've got. Alright, that's pretty good. The only thing is there's like a hard edge where the two colours meet. I'm going to have to sort of blend that with some sandpaper. Otherwise, when we put the white on, you'll actually see that, that line. So I'll just give that a light sand and then we'll get all the white on. Yeah, and then somehow, got to remove it all from these high spots. I just blew the dust off that and had a close look at it, and what you should see is just dull transitions from one colour to the other. If you see any sort of glossy edges after you've done the sanding, it means that you haven't really touched that surface, and At the moment, just looking at that, it looks nicely blended together. So I'll get the white on here now. Incidentally, I found out why those soft-crest cockatoos were going nuts yesterday. Turns out that ringtail possums will actually eat eggs and baby parrots, like the chicks. So I'm guessing that there may have been a nest up in that palm tree and the cockatoos were doing their best to protect it. But that racket went on for about 3 hours. Reached a crescendo about 6 o'clock. We had to shut all the windows in the kitchen, it was that noisy. Alright, so there's our white powder, and I'm going to show you the setup for putting that on. What I've got is a very well used piece of aluminium plate here, and I've driven 4 screws into that plate to raise the casting off the surface of it, and also to take the earth through to the casting. Now I've got the plate here earthed back to the powder coating unit and to the building ground. Now you need to have a really good solid earth if you want the powder to go on and stay on. And what we're going to do now is rest the casting on there and try and get the white powder on it. Now just to be clear, I've already done this 4 times. I just needed to rehearse it and make sure I knew what I was doing. I think I've got the process right. So those little sparks you can see there just tell me that the part is actually earthed. Alright. Now this is a persistent problem I've been having. I cannot get the powder to go on evenly. You see down in this corner here, it always seems to blow off. I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong. Everything is set up normally, the way I would normally do it. So I've just got to keep at it and try and get lots of powder on there. Okay, that looks pretty good now. I'll go around the back and check the other side there, but then I think we're ready to move on. Okay, I've checked that all over and it seems pretty good. I've gone right around the edges and there's none of the original powder coat showing. So what I need to do now is to get all of the powder off the very top layer of that plate there. Now I've seen this done before using a very fine paintbrush and just sort of dusting off the powder, but there's just too much detail here for that to work. So what I've got is sort of a very soft sponge sanding block, and I need a sort of material wrapped around that which is disposable, so as we mop up the powder we can just throw it away. And I was thinking to myself, what's a material that's sort of disposable, is good at removing waste material, but is still kind and gentle to the underlying layer. And there it is. So I'm going to wrap this around that sponge sanding block and we're just going to dampen it slightly and basically mop up the powder. Now I've tried it, it does work, I'll show you. Okay, I've got about 4 layers of that toilet paper wrapped around that sponge block there, and I've got a sort of a damp sponge just here, and I'm just going to dampen the paper, and then we just sort of use a blotting action to start with. So what you really want to do is to mop up the powder and not just simply wipe it off. If you wipe it off, it'll just roll off and onto the underlying surface there, and you get sort of like little pockets of powder. And then you can see the powder on the surface of the tissue. You just peel that layer off and just keep going. When you've got most of it up, you can start wiping, but you've got to be very careful you don't get any wrinkles in the paper, so it'll trail down and ruin the surface underneath. If you mess this up, you've basically got to take all the powder off, just blow it off the compressed air and start again. Well, that looks pretty good, but I need to go over this and double check it. Now there is a little corner down here where there's like a broken area in the casting where there was some sand, debris, and the white powder is still in there. Now I'm going to get a cotton wool bud, one of these things, what do you call that, Q-tip, and I'm just going to rake that out, and then yeah, we'll bake it. I think it's pretty good. Alright, I think that's good enough to go. Alright, I managed to get it in there without dropping it. Yeah, let's let it cook. Just took that out, still hot, but what do you reckon? It's got to be close. Okay, got a couple of little details to take care of, and then I'll show you the finished product. Well, I've done the finishing touches on that now, and that meant cleaning up the back of the plate with a random orbit sander. Now that little laser engraved plate filled up the void where the riser was. I milled out that hole, and it's got the finish date on there as well. And that word bedankt, I believe, means thank you in Dutch, or at least that's what Google Translate said, so I hope that's right. And what I'll do is I'll include some Vegemite, and I've also got some round head nickel plated slotted screws, and they will go in the corners where they're shown on Bart's sticker. So I'm going to get this in the mail today. Now by the time you see this video, Bart will have already received this, and I wanted it to be a surprise, so I'm going to get him to tell me when it's arrived and I'll publish this video. So I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for watching as usual, and I'm going to see you again very soon, about 2 weeks time. Not quite sure what that video is going to be about, but yeah, stick around, you'll find out. Okay, Espresso signing out for now. Cheers.